you know what? I'm gonna take a photo of all of you here, if I could. Thank you. I'll see if I can take a selfie. Oh. Thank you. I got it. Okay. Oh shit, that was totally unscripted. By the way, okay. Again, really thank you all for being here. We are now in the final stretch, final sessions of the PyCon US. So the closing keynote this time is Carol Willing. And when Carol asked me, why do I want to invite her, and it's really like I want you all to know about her. And it's also because she is really one of the inspirations for me, a friend, one of the friends I have from my early journey in Python. And really it's like what Margaret said earlier in her keynote about, you know, things are hard for women in tech, and a lot of time I don't want to admit that. I don't want to say it's hard for me because I'm in the Python community, but I think we need to acknowledge that. But having Carol, who's always been there for me, makes it easy, makes it bearable. So really, I want you to know my friend Carol. Carol, come on stage.
Okay, welcome, 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 everybody. I always wanted to say that like Stephen Colbert. But actually, it's not Stephen Colbert, it's the other guy. But anyway, thank you, Marietta. I am incredibly honored to be here with all of you, and many of you will be up on the stage with me today. But for those of you that think, oh, I could never get up on this big stage and speak, I should tell you a little bit about my first PyCon talk. My first PyCon talk was back in 2015, and I was not a core developer, and I was giving a talk on how to contribute to core Python. And I got up to the podium, and I was terrified. And 5 of the core developers were up on stage with me for moral support, still terrified. And at some point, 4 of them left the stage. Brett was wishing me luck. And I begged him, can you please stand up here with me? Because it might help me calm down. And it did and it didn't. He's like, how long do you want me to stand up here? And I said, he's like, the whole talk? And I said, well, if you get to the image of a boy playing the tuba in his bathrobe, then if I give you the thumbs up, go. If not, please stay. And then as they were introducing me, I'm on the verge of a panic attack, and I asked Brett, will you hold my hand? And he did, up until we got to that slide. And that just shows you right there what amazing people we have in this community. And today, I'm actually going to talk about distributed networks, and in particular, 3 fundamentals of distributed networks: connection, communication, and scale. But first, I also want to share a story from Thursday. I had the pleasure of meeting our keynote speaker, Ned Batchelder's wife, Susan, and it was her first PyCon. And we started talking, and she is a prolific writer and educator, and she was asking, like, you know, how come I never knew that you could do Python and do meaningful work in 5 lines of code or less? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'm a better teacher than Ned. No, I'm just kidding. Ned is a fabulous teacher. But she reminded me of something that really touched me that day. And what she reminded me was our journey, hers and mine, were very different than many of you, for which I am really grateful. When she and I were young, it was hard to be a woman or a girl that liked math and science. It was not encouraged. In fact, it was actively discouraged. And as I was thinking about this on Thursday night, I was really touched at the amazing group of people that I have run across in the last decade. And I want to thank everyone that has helped me get to this point because it really matters. So, for those of you that do not know me, I'm Carol Willing. I'm a core developer, worked on Jupyter, Noteable, my fantastic startup company with just wonderful folks. We're kind enough to also sponsor PyCon, so it really makes me happy that we've built the same community within our company that we feel within Python. And so thank you to everybody there. So I talked about connection, communication, scale in distributed networks. And some of you may know, some of you might not, Barbara Liskoff was the second woman to get the Turing Award, which is sort of like the Nobel Prize of Computing. And she was also the first woman in the US to get a PhD in computer science. Now, I've always been interested in networks and the power of networks, and she really did foundational research in data abstraction, fault tolerance, distributed computing, a few different languages she wrote, and a lot, well, I won't say a lot, but some of Python is actually based on foundational work that she did, things like iterators. And so I want you to know about her, because a lot of what I've learned about distributed computing comes from reading her books from decades ago. The other thing that I love is learning and helping empower people to learn. And so I do a lot of reading about cognitive science, which really combines a whole bunch of different interests of mine. And I think it's really influenced my view on tech. Now, all of you know it has been a challenging couple of years. We have lots of global issues in front of us that are very complicated and very complex. In addition, we have a lot of trends in computing in 2023, and those also have a lot of complexity to it and a lot of uncertainty. Which ones will be successful, which ones won't? And you, as a developer or someone who works in tech, are right smack in the middle between those two things. And uncertainty is something that is going to be a constant. It is a constant within a distributed network for the simple element that time can do very weird things to networks. And so remember, uncertainty will always be there. And my hope is that at the end of this talk, you will feel a little bit better about dealing with uncertainty. The other thing is people have opinions. Anybody who's read a mailing list or talked on Discord know that there are strong opinions on things, and that's good. All of you have different reasons for being here this week, and whether it's to learn, to share knowledge, to get a job, to grow the global community, whatever it is, remember what your journey is. So again, we're going to talk first about a node or an individual and talk about connection. Then we're going to talk about communication in a network or a group. And then we're going to talk about really what I think is the superpower of networks, which is scaling. And my mentor, Margot, many years ago, coached me to go to grad school when I could not see the talent that I had. I was having panic attacks, and, I thought I was a broken, isolated, stupid failure, even though I was doing pretty well in my engineering program. And she coached me to go to MIT. And while I was there, she encouraged me to apply for a scholarship to pay for the other half of the tuition, which I didn't have money for. And I said, well, I'm not going to get it because I'm the youngest person in the program. And she looked at me in her Margot kind of way and said, well, you're not going to get it if you don't apply. And happily, I did get the scholarship. And one of the beautiful things is we are still in touch today and continue to mentor people, which was pretty cool. So let me go back to 2013. A decade ago, I did not know Python. I knew a few other programming languages. I was 46 years old after taking a long break from tech. And 46 years old in tech years would be like 92. So I was ancient. I was around before personal computers, before the internet and World Wide Web, before cell phones, smartphones, and the number of people that told me it will be impossible to come back to tech at your age because you don't have skills and your skills have evaporated. And when I left tech, which was over a decade before that, I was managing 20 software developers, and I was like, okay, but this doesn't make sense. Like, I've taught and learned languages while I was taking a break. I don't know that that's right. So for anybody who has to take a long break, and somebody for health reasons, childcare, whatever, if they tell you you can't, know that you can. It takes work, but you definitely can. At the time, at this crossroads, I was like, okay, do I go back to tech or do I not go back to tech? And I really didn't know. I was also a part-time caregiver to my mom, who was in her late stages of Alzheimer's, and her neural network in her brain was not connected really anymore. At least the speech portion of it, the memory portion was gone, but she was still happy. But it was really hard to try and figure out, okay, how do I connect and communicate with her? 5 years before that, she still didn't have like the long-term memory and might have that distant look in her eyes at times, but she was at least able to communicate and get to know my kids, her grandchildren. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to connect with her. And I finally found that the way to connect with her was not through speaking and language, but it was actually through touch and her ability to hear and listen. So my mom was an amazing knitter. I'm a horrible knitter. But what I would do is I would buy these big chunky balls of yarn, and I would give it to her, she would hold it, and I would knit, and that physical connection made me feel connected to her. The other thing I would do is I would play songs on the ukulele for her, and she would smile and kind of, move a little, but so it was a really powerful way to connect with her. So back to the point of okay, I don't know what the future is going to hold for me. I don't know whether to go back to tech or not. There's lots of life and uncertainty around me. And as I thought about returning, I wrote this blog post about whether or not I was going to return. And at the end of it, I made the decision to return to tech. But I realized that this time I was going to do it on my terms. I was going to follow my passion and my interests, which was writing software and building things, and also to really help the next generation of developers and problem solvers to be successful. And teaching and learning about teaching was something that was very, very important to me. So many of us came for the language, and all of us at some point had to get a connection to the language. And at first, you might feel like that little dot on the far side, all alone, feel like you're the only one that has ever started to learn Python. And now I can stand here today and say, hey, I feel like the other side, where there has been so much connection to people and concepts and things that I really value. So how do you create a connection, whether it's as a person or as a computer? The first thing is you need to motivate someone or something to connect. And there are many possibilities due to Python's rich ecosystem of packages. And thank everyone who maintains PyPI. We could not have this great ecosystem without you. The other thing that I think is really unique about Python is we can motivate people by helping connect to their interests. And their interests could be anything from music to web to DevOps to open hardware. But when I started with Python, or any other language for that matter, I usually would use something that was meaningful to me, which was music. And I found a Python library called Music21. It's actually a music theory, musicology library that Mike Cuthbert wrote. And what was great is their documentation talked about how you could do all these cool things in 5 lines of code or less. Because of the rich libraries that Python has, it was actually true. And so what I started doing was showing these, at the time, programs to other people in a community makerspace that I was working at. And I realized it was starting to resonate with folks. So beyond motivation, people need an intention to connect. And Python's language, from the ground up, has been designed for people's success. Python is supposed to be intuitive so that anyone can contribute, that it would be understandable as plain English or whatever your native language might be, and that it should be useful for everyday tasks and allow people to have a short development time. And we often talk about the speed of languages and this, that, and the other, and that's great. You know, there's a time and place where speed is really important, but I think often we overlook how fast people can get things done. And with Python, it really kicks. So the last part of intention is to make the language accessible. And I think the readability of Python was something that really drew me in. The ability not to have that cluttered view of all the types and things like that helped me. Now, the other cool thing about Python is there's a lot of places where people have choices as they develop their program. Things are flexible. If you like type annotations, have at it, use it in a production code, probably a really good thing to have. But if you're just prototyping or you're just learning, don't worry about the typing yet. There'll be time and place for that. And one of the things that the core development team did a couple of years ago was to the Python enhancement proposals, the PEPs, we added a required section called How to Teach This. And at the time, people were saying the language is too complex, this and that, we don't like the new features. And, you know, in the back of my head, I'm always like, you don't have to use every feature of the language, but whatever. But I thought it was great. And PEP 701, that just got approved about F-strings, had a section on how you teach it. And the difference between before was now inside you can have any valid Python expression, not just a variable or something like that, which I think is going to be really powerful. So these things help build confidence. And once someone has confidence, they are often ready to connect and take the leap into the unknown and send a request. So we're in this network, we're trying to connect, and we can send a request to people, systems, or tools. And I made a distinction between those because people are people, and boxes of hardware and parts are systems and tools. And there's been a lot in the media recently about ChatGPT, LLMs, autonomous agents. Everybody has their own viewpoint on this, but at the end of the day, they are still tools. They are not people. And I'm going to do a quick aside because I think this is an important topic, and I think it's a topic that's going to be around for a long time. I've seen lots of paradigm shifts in tech, like the web or cell phone service, and these neural networks and large language models, they're here to stay. So I think it's really important that people learn how to use them, what they are, what their limitations are. So the company that I've been working at for the last 3 years, and we're trying to build the next generation of, the third generation of interactive notebooks, we have a library out. We purposely open sourced it, and we purposely provided examples so that people could get up and running and decide for themselves whether or not this is something they have an interest in. One place that I think it will be useful is to help people learn. And whether you're a beginner or expert, these models can help provide information about what potential code should be written. Doesn't mean it's right, but it can at least guide you towards that. And then my last thing in the aside is I have found a few helpful voices in my own research of large language models. Simon Willison is a longtime member of the Python community. He has a wonderful library out there called Dataset. If you haven't tried it, it is really accessible. It lets you basically create and take SQLite databases and serve it up so that you can then do manipulations on it. He's got a great new library called Shot Scraper, which lets you do scraping even easier. So it's worth checking out. But he also has a really great blog about why people, about the research that large language models and his take on it. Also, Jeremy Howard and Rachel Thomas have been really instrumental the last decade or so of providing free knowledge about AI and ethics. And I think that it's well worth checking it out. So, you've made the request, you receive a response, you're going to process that response, and much like security, when you're getting a response from these large language models, it's good to trust, maybe, if you wish, but definitely verify whether or not the information that you're getting is valid. Once you've established connections in a real network, you would be monitoring those connections and making sure that things are going well as you expect. And sometimes computer systems need to disconnect and kind of go into this loopback phase where they're not really doing stuff in the network. And this is really important because as open source contributors, maintainers, burnout is real. And I encourage you, when you feel burnt out, say no and give yourself the compassion to take the time to re-energize so that when you're ready, you can come back with all the superpowers that you have and you can continue to monitor yourself and your energy. So we've talked about connection, and I want to move now into communication. And communication is the key reason we have networks. We want to get messages from one place to another. And I think Guido put it really well in his quote from 2016, that we have programming languages to communicate ideas. And we're communicating those ideas to other people, not just computers. And I think that's a really valuable distinction. So one of the things you do on a network is you broadcast messages. And in our community, Michael Kennedy does a Talk Python to Me podcast that broadcasts a lot of really valuable information. And honestly, I have it on usually when I'm washing my dishes at home, but I highly encourage you to listen to it. There are some really great content episodes, new things that are coming up. Translators are really important in a network. When you have two different protocols in a network, sometimes you need to bridge those. And language could be a different protocol. I speak one language, somebody else speaks another language. Fast API, which is a very popular framework right now, has done a great job of providing that language to many different people and those translations, as well as providing illustrations and other ways for people to learn about the project and also just concurrency and distributed computing in general. The other translators that we have are with different programming languages. And I personally believe that the next decade of Python, you will see more integrations with Rust. You will see more integrations with JavaScript. We also have something unique in Python in comparison to many other languages, and that is we have the ability to have different domains, different industry domains, different academic domains working together. So remember those complex world issues that we had before? You can actually bring together people from different domains, perhaps in a notebook, where you can use prose and code and get people on the same page to understand a problem. Whether that person is coming from chemistry, public health, government, academia, and I think that's a really powerful trait of Python that doesn't often get said enough. So I'm going to take a quick break and grab some water. Okay, so when we look at networks, networks have shapes. They have different topologies. And within those topologies, they have clusters. And in the Python world, we have a lot of different clusters. The outreach cluster is perhaps one of the strongest clusters we have. I would not be standing in front of you today had a very special person, Shauna Gordon-McKeon, not reached out when I was kind of tentative and said, oh, I'll help you, and got me involved with Open Hatch, which was a nonprofit that helped people make their first contribution to open source. And it was a Django code base, so it was my avenue into learning Python. I also would not be speaking up here today had it not been for Jessica McKellar, who hounded me to serve on the program committee for PyCon back in 2013, to submit posters and talk proposals, and I'm really glad she did. One of the great things about Open Hatch is we were able to mentor a lot of people, help them build their skills, and then those people went out and helped other people learn. We also have local clusters, user groups. San Diego Python, San Diego PyLadies is near and dear to my heart. The study groups we've had for many years have really empowered lots of folks. And there was a really good lightning talk. I think it was this person's first lightning talk, and it was about how to organize virtual meetups. And I think the virtual clusters are really important. The pandemic showed us that we need different modalities with which to communicate. Django Girls has been a huge cluster, and it is something that Melanie Arbor, who is a friend of mine from San Diego, she came to San Diego PyLadies and San Diego Python not knowing any Python. She helped organize the study group. She helped organize Django Girls. She started programming in Django, making her own website that would send positive affirmations to people. And she's been a speaker and also a tutorial teacher here at PyCon. And I really want to recognize her because it was the community and her effort that really, really connected with a lot of people and brought more people into the Python community. Open hardware, my love. I love blinky things, so PyLadies, I have a lot of feelings about PyLadies, but I'm going to share those in a few minutes when we talk about scale. Core development cluster, super, super important. It's what creates the language that we're working on, and it's not just the core developers. We have an amazing triage team and many different contributors, and it's great to see the community being vibrant and more people getting interested in doing core development. Conferences, clusters, we're here, we're sharing knowledge. The fact that we have Charlas 2 days is amazing, and the Education Summit, and it will continue to be amazing. So in network analysis, when you look at the topology and you look at the clusters, you often will also look and see, is there a cluster that's isolated from the rest of the network? So you ask, who's missing? And then the next question to ask is, why are they missing? And I'm really pleased to say that in the last decade, we have come a long way. We still have a long way to go. But in terms of expanding Python's global reach and getting more people involved with Python. Network expansion, always a good thing. And I think Eric Hulscher put it well when, hey, if you're standing in a group of people, leave a space for someone else to join the network. Just like you have extra capacity on some of your networks, same deal. So Python's network, to be successful, depends on communication. And I want to take the final few moments that I have to actually talk about scale, which is what I think Python's network's superpower. Guido had said that sharing information was something that was a really important lesson to him. And I often will tell people, start small and scale. We did that with IPython and Jupyter Notebooks. Back in 2014, Lorena Barba was a keynote speaker at SciPy, and she said, interactive computing is a tool of connection. And at the time, I was working with folks in the San Diego area and exposing them to the notebooks. And what I was seeing was the impact that it had. People felt more comfortable and able to approach the material because they had something they could take away before. Big programs could then be chunked into smaller chunks that actually had prose to explain it. And for high school students that perhaps didn't see themselves as programmers, you could actually start the notebook with a compelling visual example, an interactive example that really, really started to hook them. So in 2014, there were 65,000 plus notebooks on GitHub, which at the time we felt was like a big number. Well, fast forward to today, there are 11 million plus notebooks on GitHub. So how did we grow to over 11 million notebooks in a decade with a very small core team, a sizable number of contributors as well? And as I reflect back on it, it started with communication, problem solving, passion, and keeping in mind simplicity. When the notebooks first came out, they ran on your local machine. And back in 2014, Python was not as easy as it is today to install. It also wasn't as easy to install packages. And so Minrig and Kelly and I started working on a project called Jupyter Hub, which would give anybody who was part of a network a Jupyter notebook that they could use. And what that did is it unlocked universities to teach data science, like here at Berkeley, and that was great. Another unexpected benefit that we didn't realize at the time was it also provided greater accessibility to the students. It didn't matter if you were the poorest or the wealthiest student, if you had a Chromebook or a high-end MacBook, you all had the same experience because it was being delivered through the browser. You had the same compute as everybody else had on the server. And after the success of Jupyter Hub, we also wanted to share scientific research papers and things online with the greater world. And so then we developed Binder, which lets you take a GitHub repo and launch it out into the world. Start small and scale. PyLadies is a great story. You know, it has done for me more than I could ever possibly express. And I foolishly thought I could get all the logos on one slide. That was a big mistake. It took several slides, and I don't have them all. And the thing about PyLadies, Brazil is a particular force in PyLadies, but PyLadies as a whole has helped over 120,000 people get involved in using Python and landing jobs and diversifying our community. Thank you to all of you PyLadies out there. Oftentimes I will feel like a unicorn because there's still a lot of meetings I go to where I'm the only woman. Go to conferences, I might be the only woman in a room or a session, and that can sometimes feel really isolating, going back to that network, like who's not connected to the network? And so Abigail did a great job saying, hey, we need to show and make more role models and mentors accessible. And one of the things she did was she set metrics and goals for what she wanted to achieve in Ghana for PyLadies, and it has been incredibly successful. And it has really transformed the Python community in Africa, as well as PyLadies in general. So on a personal level, there's times where you think, okay, is this worth it? And then I look around at the world of PyLadies around me, and I say, yeah, tech might not be worth it, but all of these people are definitely worth it. To see what they can do and how they grow has been one of the biggest joys of my life. So start small and scale. Python Software Foundation, you've heard a lot about it this week. Scaling the Python network is the mission of the PSF. It is to scale and keep the language vibrant and also grow the entire international community of Python programmers. I also want to call out that great leaders inspire other leaders. And after PyCon Montreal, 3 women approached me and asked me to run for the PSF board. I really did not want to run, and they were very persuasive. And I'm not going to tell you what their argument was because that wouldn't be fair to them. But I just want to recognize them They are wonderful people who have really helped a lot of women and men and others over the years. As I look at the next decade of Python and where we are going to scale and have an impact, mobile computing is one of them. Russell Keith McGee, for years, has been working on Beware and creating a project where everyone is welcome. The Sprint Challenge coins were very sought after for many sprints. And I'm really pleased to say, I don't know if it's public yet, but I'm going to say it anyway because I want it to come to fruition more than anything else, is it will be a Tier 3 project within Core Python. And we will, in this decade, have a good mobile story for Python. But wait, that's not all. We also are going to have a really darn good story for the web and the browser. And at this PyCon, we had our first WebAssembly Summit. It was very well attended. There's a repo in the PSF, so if you didn't attend, you can keep up to date as to what was going on. And in the future, you're going to see even more work within Core Python about WASI and WebAssembly. And then there are some other projects in the ecosystem that are also getting more and more popular every day. So as we scale the PSF and the impact that it has, I am humbled to have been a part of this community and to have been a small part of its long-term success. I have learned a lot from my own personal failures, and I've also had the joy of innovating and doing things that really had an impact. So remember, scale has a global impact in a network. What it does is it increases the probability of success. When you have multiple different routes through a network, if one path goes down, there's another path you can take. And in an uncertain world, that's really powerful because it builds up resilience. And a resilient network is better than one that's sort of brittle and falls apart anytime it gets a load on it. So my call to action as we wrap up to you is to remember these three aspects of healthy, vibrant networks: connection, communication, and scale. And to maintain Python's global networks, there's a few things you can do. And perhaps the most important one to me is the last one, because that was the lesson I learned from my own mentor. Take 5 minutes to encourage others to imagine the possible. As Guido said, a community that creates a language causes happiness in the users and it has an impact around the world. And to finally wrap up, I want everyone to embrace that Python really truly is the people's programming language. It will help us succeed in an uncertain decade with our resilient global networks. And I'm super happy that back in 2013, I took the plunge and decided to come back to tech. And in particular, the Python community, it has rewarded me in so many incredible ways. And I think what brings me the most joy is to see other people succeed on their journeys. So I want to just say in closing, you know, I came for the language, I stayed for the community, and together, we changed the world. Thank you for listening. It has been my pleasure, and thank you, Marietta, for giving me the chance to speak to everyone here today. This talk was from the heart, and until our paths cross again, safe travels, safe journeys with Python. Don't forget to ask questions when you need to, and thank you so much.